All right, I'd love to invite our panelists to please turn on your webcams and join us. Hello. We'll continue to allow people to trickle in, and of course, this is being recorded, so everyone will have access to the audio recording. But thank you and welcome. We're here to talk about the state of OTT revenue. We'll be sharing data from Applicaster's study that was launched earlier this year, and we are also speaking with two fantastic experts who can offer their expertise. We'll proceed to the introductions. So let's start with Reeves from Kling. Reeves, if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself and Kling and how it helps customers monetize their content.
Of course. Thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. My name is Reeves Carrington. I'm the Director of Enterprise Sales for the Americas at Kling. And as a brief introduction of Kling, we are the subscriber retention management company, and we just celebrated a decade in OTT this year. We're headquartered in Amsterdam with 5 offices around the globe, and our mission is to help OTT providers acquire and retain their subscribers. We support customers at every phase, from startups to standalone services to large sophisticated broadcasters around the world, like Sinclair Broadcasting and Canadian Broadcasting Company here in North America, Sky in Germany, KCP in Korea, Optisport in Australia, and many more.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Stein Erik from Vemond. And Stein Erik, I'm hoping you can also introduce yourself and explain a little bit about how Vemond powers online video.
Absolutely. So hi, Stein Erik Sødhaug from Vemond Media Solutions. I'm the VP of Sales Engineering. I've been with the company 7 years now. So for those of you who don't know, Vemond's really been an innovator and a pioneer in the OTT space, in the SVOD space. We've been streaming in some capacity since the late 90s, originally under our parent company, TV2 in Norway. And since 2011, we've been our own company and working to bring up streaming OTT solutions around the world. We've worked with companies like Comcast, Reuters, TV2 in Norway, the Bonnier Group in Scandinavia. We work with Foxtel in Australia. We help stand up companies like iFlix as well. We're centered around a core CMS and really focused on efficient, quick workflows. And we have deep expertise and have been building OTT services before it was a word and before it was a thing, and look to help provide all of you who joined us today with some guidance around how we can help and how you can make better OTT services and make more revenue off them. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Lastly, I'm Deborah Prywis. I head up marketing and product here at Applicaster. And at Applicaster, we've built a no-code app management platform that offers a productized, highly configurable approach to building and updating streaming service apps. But we do this in a way where you can customize your front end and also work with your preferred partners on the back end. And we've been doing this since 2009. We initially built our platform Zap as a tool for ourselves because we needed greater operational efficiency and to speed our apps to market. And then we opened up Zap to the rest of the industry. So my product also provides the connective glue for our panelists today. We can bring it all back to what we're here to talk about. We offer custom text. You can customize your tech stack working with your preferred partners as plugins, and Vemond and Kling are available in our marketplace for customers to add to their apps, along with the rest of their preferred partners to power their online businesses. So we're going to move into our study now. And I'm going to explain, we'll be breaking this webinar into 3 sections, and I have arranged our study data points to fit into these sections, and then our panelists will discuss and offer all sorts of tips and actionable insights and strategic guidance. But I wanted to share, we needed to run our own study because so much of this information just isn't widely available. So the press coverage, the analysts tend to cover the streaming giants. We know what Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max are up to if you're reading the trades, as I'm sure all of us are. However, there are hundreds more streaming services that don't necessarily have the budgets and the number of engineers of these companies. So we wanted to know, how are these companies managing the changes from the pandemic and from lockdown and the boom of streaming? McKinsey offered up some data that showed that we catapulted 5 years forward in the first 2 months of the pandemic when it came to digital adoption. Streaming is on the rise, people have changed their viewing habits, and we'll share with you data on how streaming companies of all sizes are planning for growth and changing their business models going forward. So we'll start with the methodology. We sourced nearly 100 professionals who are building OTT apps. This is a hard to find audience, but they offer really valuable information. We shared 10 questions, and you can see a breakdown on your screen here. A little over half were broadcasters. We had a number of direct-to-consumer video brands, digital broadcasters, we can call them, as well as aggregators and one lone video game developer who's currently making a streaming app. Our audience was largely North American, followed by Europe, LATAM, and 5% came from Asia. So we'll start with some of our growth data points to kick things off. And we found, we asked our respondents, what are you expecting in terms of growth? And not surprisingly, the vast majority, 84%, are planning for growth, whether as a result of it being organic growth, just kind of the streaming tsunami benefiting everybody, or from their expansion effort that they've earned from adding platforms and adding audiences or increasing their marketing. Really, I think what's surprising is that there are a number, nearly 20% not planning for growth. So hopefully they also saw our study where we gave them some nice growth hacks and some tips, because this is a wonderful opportunity for every company to grow their business. On the next slide, we show that most are expecting their audiences to grow up to 50%. But I think it's really nice to note that just about 20% are forecasting growth above 75%. Some are planning for extreme growth and making sure that they're prepared for this. And then lastly, in this section, most are planning to add new platforms as well as new apps as some of the changes they're making on their end as the year goes on. And I think that this is really important. We'll come back to our panelists now. I think that this is really interesting because these are two things that we can do, companies can do immediately to take advantage of this opportunity. You can add platforms and you can add apps. So by adding platforms, you instantly add audiences. People have already chosen the devices and the platforms on which they're going to watch content. You need to be available and accessible for these audiences if you want to be part of their consideration set. At Applicaster, we offer 8 different platforms that our customers use to reach these audiences. And fun fact, smart TVs have had the most growth out of any sector of streaming in the past few years. The pandemic really helped this skyrocket. And what's interesting, though, is that these are often the most common gaps in streamer strategies. It could be because they're a different code base, or they don't necessarily have the native developers on hand for this. But it's a really important area to focus. One, you'll instantly add these audiences. If you want to dabble, Samsung is the #1 OEM for streaming in this space by far. But also you can shine in these less crowded app stores. The other statistic from that slide was adding apps, and this is going deeper on the platforms that you already understand and have an expertise in. There's a value here too. So for example, some of the networks that we work with around the world have their channel apps or their mother app, but then they'll launch genre apps for greater market penetration and maybe experimenting with different revenue models, and we'll cover that in a minute. We see networks adding a news app, or a sports app, or even multiple kids apps. So with that in mind, Stein Erik, I'd like to start with you and ask your advice on some of the strategies that these companies can use to then acquire audiences for the platforms they're on and the platforms they grow to.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with that. I think, one of the things that we see with companies that are being successful is how they market it, right? So being able to leverage the full breadth of your digital services, and there's 2 areas I'll cover there, really how you can leverage social media, and we'll dabble a bit into using fast channels as well as another marketing vehicle and how you can get exposure on different platforms. So on the first, I think we live in a world where we're all trying to get away from social media, even as we're all hooked into it. And I think as content owners, there's a move to get back the control of the users, to take them away from social media. However, social media really functions in this world as the water cooler. That's where you talk about new shows. That's where you learn about what your friends are watching. That's really where you get, you get exposure to new things. So we see companies that are successful are promoting their content across social media platforms, but using it not as a destination, but really as a way to draw back into your streaming service or your D2C service. So perhaps you give little snippets, perhaps you give an episode or something that you can view through social media, and then give them a way to come back, and then a simple sign up or simple viewing, or even just use it to promote that, hey, there's a new show airing, this is something you're interested in, and bring you back. What we've seen over the last 2 years also is an explosion of, what's known as fast services. These are, free streaming services. They're on Roku, they're on your Samsung, they're everywhere. And generally they don't have necessarily the premier content of a brand, but it allows you to give a consumer that traditional lean back TV experience controlled by the remote, where you get exposure to content in that serendipitous way that TV did, right? So you're flicking through the channel guide, you see a channel for, some news program, National Geographic, Reuters, Bloomberg, some news channel you're not aware of, or some content type that's more niche. So through that fast channel, through a linear experience, you can get a viewer engaged in your programs and then draw them back into your streaming service. We're seeing kind of that breadth of using these mechanisms, use all the new connected TVs and smart TVs to do distribution of these free fast services, and then use social media really to drive viewers back to your D2C channel, and use those, forums and marketplace of ideas to get exposure for your content. Thank you, Deborah.
I think it's worth noting that brands are understanding not to give too much content away for free anymore, and that it's really important. You want and you need that data. So I think those are really wonderful examples. Reeves, do you have recommendations on models for acquiring new users?
Yeah, I think especially the terminology in the study I found to be, really fascinating, right? So I think it's obviously very noble and entrepreneurial and optimistic to expect growth and to work on strategies to acquire new users. But I think it's also crucial for brands to prepare for that growth, right? And I would strongly encourage brands, especially in that sort of direct viewer dollar exchange D2C space, to embrace a philosophy of retention as early as possible, right? So every business that's based on a recurring revenue model is effectively fighting the same fight, right? It's this leaky bucket. So growth is going to mean that the faucet is filling the bucket faster than the leak is draining the bucket, right? So if we map that onto like an OTT experience, each phase of the customer journey has its own complexities. So a user registering for the service, right? Handing over their email, password credentials, selecting an offer, right? Do they just want to dabble with a free trial, or are they ready to commit to a monthly, annual, season pass? Transaction with payment details, right? Which form? Do they want to use a digital wallet, a credit card? Are they checking out in-app? All the way through to customer care, data aggregation. It's very difficult, right? But understanding your current customer behavior, there's a lot of insights there. That's the best tool for predicting what your future customer behavior is going to be like. So again, I would recommend developing a retention philosophy soon in the process. Don't wait until you have a massive or a sort of critical mass of customers, because it won't happen if you don't adopt this philosophy early on. Get to know your subscribers. If I can just use one example from one of our customers, the Canadian Broadcasting Company. So CBC, they operate their gym product on the Kling service, and using Churn IQ, which is our retention analytics platform, they noticed that there was this burn and churn behavior, right? So they had a few really popular shows but they were finding that their most engaged cohort were actually I think it was their second highest likely to churn cohort, which means that people were jumping into the system, highly engaged with the content for a short amount of time, and then churning out of the system. So the takeaway here is obviously that these users are engaged, right? They're familiar with the CVC brand. They appreciate the content, but maybe they didn't strike the right value proposition with those users, right? So they ran a win back campaign with those former subscribers. It was a mix of different promotional codes for maybe users that are motivated by the cost, right? Averaging out the annual cost to where it was something valuable for them. Sometimes it was content related, right? They wanted to push and say, hey, that piece of content that you really enjoyed, that's not the only content on the platform. So it's about understanding your subscribers, what's motivating them to either stay on the system or, in many cases, more importantly, to churn, and then combating that sort of behavior with the various levers that you have available to you. So adopting that retention philosophy earlier, stopping the leaky bucket, and really planning for that growth is a strong recommendation.
Thank you for that. And let me ask both of you, in terms of acquiring those users to then hold on to, is there a single silver bullet? Is there a recommendation that tends to work across sectors or across industries, or do people really need to adopt a philosophy of experimentation to see what works for them?
Yeah, I can start on that, and certainly Reeves can expand. I think the one simplest silver bullet, and there is no true silver bullet in all this,
So
but one of
light bullet.
yeah, it's something. It's not made of wood, but so I think one of the first things you need to do is engage the user from the beginning. So once you make the journey very simple, and I think Reeves was touching upon that, make it very simple for them to sign up. Remove the barriers, remove the friction on the sign up, make it easy for them to select preferences and content very quickly that they're interested in. And then, one of the highest return ways to engage a user in the first day or two is to send them a notification on content, right? So that seems to be, there's something like 72% of, if you do not do a user, you have like a very quick churn in the first day if you don't do a notification. So that simple step of saying, there's content that you're gonna like, start watching this, engage with the user, give them something that reminds them that they signed up for the service and there's something that's interesting for them to watch. And I think that goes into something we'll talk a little bit later in the panel around how to promote content, how to organize it, how to make it very simple, clean, to give, proper navigation and promotion of content in there. So engage with the user very quickly, give them a notification, get them watching as quickly as possible. I think, one great example of that, talking from the market, you take a look at Netflix, and as you start navigating down the structure they've put into their application, they've given you the top 10 right away. So what everyone is watching. We all think we're very independent minded, but when we see other people like that content, we're going to be drawn to it much more quickly, right? So we see the top 10, this stuff must be good. I'll start watching there, that's relevant. And the other thing you've seen a lot of experimentation from, and Netflix and others are doing this, is the autoplay functionality. So give the user, if they scrub over something, a quick play, something that starts bringing them in and drawing them in, right? And so that compels the user to stay and engage with the content. I think those are simple strategies. Just make things accessible, give them notifications quickly, promote content properly. That's the first step towards the silver bullet anyway.
So essentially, users expressed interest, you have a very limited amount of time to get them to start using your product and hopefully stay with you. I think one other element I'd like to add to this is the journey from download of the app itself. It takes effort for a user to download an app on whichever device. So they're in and they're invested. And then it's important to think about this onboarding journey. And in my world, I think about it in terms of app features. So for us, we would, we work with our customers on how to use our onboarding screens. This is a new feature that we added over the summer because we understand and we want our customers to understand how important it is to start thinking about that journey from the get-go. And then, of course, Dane, Eric, everything you just said about, and send an email, use your whole digital mix to reinforce this. And I think something that's really wonderful about apps and OTT that is different from the broadcast routes that so many of these companies have is that it's a two-way interactive medium versus a push medium, which is what broadcast started out as. And in this case, there are so many different ways to use an onboarding screen and to be creative about it and frankly change things up and experiment with it. So for ours, we have a very clever name for it. We call it the first time user experience. We can do better. It also makes it for a kind of a clunky acronym, but essentially it is that first time user experience that you need to think about. Welcome them, be hospitable, maybe say a few words, talk about the value that they're about to get. And if it isn't a free service, and there are all sorts of monetization strategies with free to paid, and you both have talked about subscription ladders. I know we'll get to that a little later on. But I think that, if there is a sign-up process, guide them through those steps. It's you can use a single screen or multi-screens, but that is your first relationship touch point inside the app, and then be sure to follow up with your digital mix if I'm summarizing correctly.
Yeah, I think that those are great recommendations. And ultimately, if you're looking for the silver bullet, you're probably not going to find one. So clearing the runway of obstacles is typically the best practice. We have one of our customers, the Big Ten Network. They had this really ambitious notion of how they created their offers. So there's 14 member schools. There are probably as many, if not more, individual sports. There's a conference pass. They wanted each one of those experiences to be curated, but you can't have 45 or 50 offers on one page and just say, eat your heart out, pick which one you want. You have to really curate the right and the right flow. And using our Media Store SDK, we're able to basically create this very curated packaging experience, right? If I'm a Michigan State volleyball fan, I can easily pick a package that is curated to my interests. But if you go through the checkout process, it's not cumbersome. You would never know that there are 40 to 50 offers powering that experience. So it is possible with the right tools, and the advice that the panelists are giving now, I think is very well founded. Really try to curate the experience, but you have to make it easy. Clear the runway of as many obstacles as possible. Any excuse users have to ditch the process, they might take. So make each individual part of the process as frictionless as possible.
That's a really important word, frictionless. It just has to be seamless and easy. All right, let's jump back into the slides. We have a section with some data points on monetizing growth. And we have a few slides. So we started with advertising. Again, if you're reading the trades, you know that advertising is hugely popular. Our study supports that too. And we wanted to find out, after advertising took a nosedive in the beginning of the pandemic, were fill rates back a year later? And the answer is, for the most part, yes. They were 80%. We're saying they were back or nearly back. They came back a little faster on mobile than TV. But I think what's really important is that our companies, we can move on to the next slide, our respondents are realizing their need to be on all the screens, the need to be ubiquitous and have as much coverage as possible, of course, with smart TVs and mobile as the two most important categories in their mind. Lastly, we wanted to know what types of monetization models they're using. And the answer is many. Hybrid is king. We hear a lot about advertising, we hear a lot about subscription, but these are not used in isolation. And we'll talk a little bit more about revenue strategies. Here, we talk about 4 key categories: advertising, subscription, TV everywhere, which is very popular in the US with cable operator relationships, as well as product placement. But there are 19 different combinations that we found from our respondents when we launched this study. So we'll come back to our panelists. And I would love to hear, Reeves, we'll start with you, please. If you can tell us how a hybrid approach and some useful strategies can be used for retention and growing customer lifetime value.
Sure. So there are really only two monetization models, right? I mean, unless your service is government sponsored or just altruistic and you're giving it away. You have the option to go direct to the consumer, right? Direct viewer exchange of credit card for content. That's sort of overly simplistic, but it's effectively what it is. Or you have a third party come in and sponsor the experience, right? And that would be an advertiser. So Kling's expertise is mostly in this direct to consumer space, although we do have a lot of customers that use advertising as sort of supplemental revenue to really maximize that customer lifetime value. So if I can borrow an example from one of our sports customers, the Canadian Hockey League or CHL, their primary business model is SVOD, right? They have these mix of single game passes that they'll sell for one price, a monthly pass that gives you sort of more value, more games for your dollar, and then a season pass that's going to be the highest value, but obviously the highest upfront exchange of cost as well. But their live events include action breaks, very similar to any other sport on broadcast TV or on ESPN Plus or anything. Now there's these action breaks where broadcasters would display ads, and they've chosen to supplement that D2C revenue with additional ad revenue, and really no cannibalization. If anything, there's that enhanced value to their sponsors, and it's really no different than you're not missing any of the action for their consumers. So that's an example of an SVOD, or a very sort of direct to consumer focused offering that supplements with AVOD. But it goes the other way too, right? You might have an AVOD customer that it's mostly maybe an off VOD. That's one thing we'd recommend, is even if you're going to be doing ad supported video, at least ask for some sort of registration mechanism at the front. Get their email, market to them, and if you have some really premium content that you think is worth putting behind a wall, some sort of paywall, right? Whether it's a live event or a TV show or movie that's really compelling, you can convert 1, 5, 10% of your customers to pay for that content. So I would recommend generally picking one of the models to be your primary monetization model, and then using the other model as sort of an optimization. Our expertise again is in the D2C space, but we have customers that are fully ad supported, and they use Kling as sort of an off VOD mechanism to power that. But I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience with some mixed models as well.
Stan Eric, I know when we were having some preliminary conversations ahead of the webinar, you mentioned various different types of pricing ladders and subscription ladders. Can you share with our audience some of those suggestions?
Absolutely. I think, there's a couple ways you can look at the subscription ladder. You can, as Reeves was kind of talking about, you can use, AVOD as a driver of your SVOD, and I think that's the simplest way to look at it. Start with a price point, and I think Peacock's a great example of that. Start with a price point of, $6.99 or $9.99 for content with ads, and don't overwhelm them with ads. Give them a good user experience, make the ads viewable. But then, make it enough so that there is a value in paying to get rid of it, right? So if you have an hour-long show, have about 5 different ad spots during the show: pre-roll, mid-rolls, and then post-rolls. And then give the user an incentive to remove those ads at a higher, $5 or $6 more up on the premium side to remove that, right? And certainly it depends on the content types. For sitcoms, shorter form content, we're certainly trained from either YouTube or that type of behavior to accept ads as part of that experience. In movies, less so. One of the cool ways you can really differentiate, an SVOD ladder is really on the quality of service and the number of devices. And this goes back into the Applicaster story as well. You want your platform on as many devices as possible. You generally have a family plan. So take a look at Netflix. You can start with the lower tiers of Netflix, which gives you you know, 2 parallel SD channels. And then for $3 more, you can give them 2 concurrent, meaning I can watch on my smart TV and my child can watch on, you know, her iPad or something like that at the same time, right? And then offer the next tier up, which is HD quality. And then ultimately offer, you know, for $14 to $16, if you're a premium entertainment service, you know, offer 4 concurrent devices running at the same time with up to 4K and UHD quality, right? So there's that way to differentiate the service and the tiers, the number of devices, the amount of users that can view it at a singular time, and then the quality. You know, we're in a bit of a quality revolution at this moment, right? Better TVs, better encoding, better compression, better internet, all around. So the ability to watch, you know, and as I did this weekend, Dune on HBO Max, I watched it on my home TV in 4K with Dolby Atmos, right? And so that's premium, you know, content at home. And so we're in this kind of revolution, and you can give that quality of experience a different price point and a different tier that you can play around with. And certainly, you know, with our system and, you know, with what Kling can do as well, it's very easy for the broadcaster, the operator, the streamer, content owner to create these tiers dynamically. I think one thing, you know, Reeves touched upon earlier is, you know, give some free example for one piece of content, but then give the user that next step in the journey where if they give you some information without subscribing, they'll get a little more content, right? And kind of walk them through that ladder very simply. So think about quality, think about ease of access through that.
Quality is really important also when it comes to retention. You mentioned we're in a quality revolution now, and I think that also means that viewers expect more. And that viewer expectation and friction threshold, you know, it's changing quickly, and it's something that brands need to be aware of. I also like your recommendation of experimenting with different pricing thresholds. You know, this will be an area we have more and more customers adding all sorts of analytics on top of the ones that are provided from, you know, their existing partnerships to really understand that user behavior and figure out what that right balance might be. I think that's wonderful. I also wanted to note that a hybrid approach can mean many different things. You know, yes, there are these traditional models, but I do want to remind the streamers out there that really you are limited in terms of revenue streams, right? Have your anchor, as our panel has said, but the additional revenue streams are nearly limitless. The Canadian Hockey League, I think, is a great example because I'm sure they also sell tickets or sell merch or have other revenue streams that could be presented to their app users, even if not in the app per se. You know, coming back to that journey, the onboarding screen could say, "Hey, welcome! We're so happy to see you here. Here's a promo code, you know, to go buy yourself a jersey or something like that." Or here's a QR code to purchase tickets if something happens. So I think these will be very interesting ways for brands to start experimenting with promoting revenue through all of their touch points, and not just getting kind of anchored by what was. You know, we were talking earlier as we were waiting to get started about, you know, the days of yore. I come from ad tech, and you know, in the beginning, you know, media companies were still thinking about, you know, 60s and 30s and 15s. And when, you know, YouTube added that skip button, everyone was in a panic. And now the idea of not having it seems crazy. And ads can be any length. You can have an 8-second ad. You know, take the time you need, but don't don't create friction and an uncomfortable experience for that user. So I did just want to mention those couple of things. All right, let's head back in. We have one more section in the study. And let me also take this opportunity, I don't think I did earlier. If anyone has any questions, there is a place in the GoToWebinar menu where you can type your questions, and we will make sure to, we will do our best to get to them at the end of our webinar today. So flexibility is a really important area. Change is in the air, change is happening faster than ever. The velocity of change is increasing. And the vast majority, 3/4 of our study respondents plan to change or are considering making a change to their revenue model. This is happening faster and faster than ever. They are also looking at ways that they want to change their relationship with how they sign on new users. So back when we launched this study, the Epic Games, Apple rev share model was, was in the news. We wanted to find out how media brands were considering acquiring new users and generating signups. So we found that many consider the value exchange fair or reasonable. They aren't planning on making a change. They'll accept sign up in app and agree to that value exchange of rev share with the app stores. But an almost even number, if you add them together, 43% are still trying to figure out how to manage subscriptions and retain more of that money, kind of bringing it back to Reeves' leaky bucket philosophy. And 20% had already made the change to only accept signups through their web stores. And then lastly, speaking of change, and coming back to this hybrid model that we've been talking about, 2/3, about 66% of respondents are planning on a hybrid approach for this year. AVOD and SVOD, of course, being the most popular, it is the most common, and audiences are well primed to understand it. So coming back to our panel, let's talk about how the goals of audience growth and retention can come into play here with this model and this need for flexibility. And Reeves, let's start with you. How do you see the brands that Kling works with iterating their revenue strategies? Or, what are some best practices? Do brands tend to make changes over time? How frequently are they making changes? Or are they doing other interesting things to increase this lifetime value of their users?
Yeah, one thing that stood out when you were just setting up this discussion point is the App Store concern. It's something we hear a lot about from customers. It's something we all read a lot about. It's something that a lot of our customers are sort of pulling their hair out over, right? 30% is a pretty significant pound of flesh when you're trying to, operate your business and be profitable. But the tech gatekeepers are the tech gatekeepers for a reason. It's very difficult to circumvent that, and I would recommend that your energy is best spent elsewhere. The customer lifetime value in many cases we found, and this is displayed in our Churn IQ Advanced Retention Analytics dashboard, the customer lifetime value on these platforms for those customers is actually often higher than it is for the web. So while the web, you're only paying an interchange fee to a PSP of, let's just say 2.9 and 2.9%, 29 cents. And on the App Store, you're paying, 30%. That sounds like a drastic difference, but ultimately, there are problems with, web payments as well, right? If I just take one example, I keep my Apple Pay up to date. I have an iPhone, I use it. I keep that credit card up to date. But on some of my other subscriptions, I'm embarrassed to say there's probably like 25 or 30 different companies that have my credit card information on file. And I just don't have the bandwidth to go update that every time I get a new credit card or I lose my credit card and replace it or something like that. In many cases, that's the way it is with our customers, right? Their customers, their subscribers, might not update their credit card information. So they're involuntarily churning out of the system, and they might need to resubscribe. Often it's difficult to win back a customer that is involuntarily churned. But in the app experiences, you don't really have that, right? The users are in high likelihood keeping their in-app purchase payment form up to date. So that's just one example. But the idea is that you want to make these smart decisions. If you don't have access to the right tools, the right data, the right analytics, it's going to seem very intuitive that 30% is not a pound of flesh you're willing to pay. But with the right insights, you're going to see, wow, well, the customer lifetime value is higher on some of these platforms, so it's worth the exchange. All this is to say, find the right tools. I know it's a bit self-serving. Find the right tools, trust the right partners, and make informed decisions about what your customers are doing and what your business is doing, because it's not always as intuitive as it seems, at surface level.
Good point. Stan Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's Reeves made some great points there, and I think I think there's a couple ways to look at this. I think the first is understand where your users are, what platforms they're going to be focused on. If you have a very youth-oriented, mobile-first, or if you're going after a market that's very Android-heavy, the 30% cut is nothing. I mean, that's your main focus. Those are your main users. They're going to get things from the App Store. They're going to do things rather intuitively and quickly, right? So think about the user, and this is something. While the brands are concerned about the loss of revenue, the potential for greater exposure on these platforms increases. And from the user perspective, they're not concerned with this. They'll do whatever method is simpler. So if you can tie it into your Apple Wallet, if you could tie it into your Google Pay and things like that, it becomes very simple. It's a one touch, it's impulsive, you can sign up very quickly, and you can move through it. I think part of how we advise our customers and the tools we bring into this conversation really are on how the insights and the actionable information that someone like Kling can provide, how the content owner can create content groupings that's much more relevant for their user. So we give them the tools, from a broadcaster perspective, as that's our background, the programming side. We really focus on how you can promote content better, how you can curate it better, how you can apply, better images, how you can create better structures for promoting content, how you can dynamically update things. And one of the things, through our own curation tools we see is there's the opportunity for seasonal promotion, right? So we're in the Halloween season right now. You have a ton of horror movies and you run those on your services. So if you look every year, Hulu does Huluween. They bring a list of content they have all around, but they promote it in such a way that it lands the user in there. And that's obviously critical for growth, is just giving them more ways to easily find content that's relevant for the moment. So whether it's, the end of the year holidays, whether it's, romance stories, rom-coms around Valentine's Day, summer adventures, or, Halloween's my favorite example anyway. You curate content, you give that relevant information to the user in a quick and easy way to find it and make it easy for them to present it. I think a broader point, and you've seen, the destination platform. So being able to cut deals and being on the Amazon Fires, being on the Rokus, having apps on those platforms, and making them easily discoverable. You'll see more and more companies, content owners are promoting their services across the distributor platform. And I think Amazon Fire is a great example. So Paramount Plus has a new show or new content they're promoting. You'll see it top featured, whether it's Picard or Star Trek or something like that, you'll see that featured in the top carousel on your Amazon Fire device. So use the outlets, use those platforms, distribute yourself broadly, and focus on getting that type of exposure, because that's, when I'm flicking through the applications, if something's promoted outside of me jumping into that app, I'll probably more likely than not go into it because it's got a nice graphic, it's got a beautiful poster, this is exactly what I'm in the mood for, it's the right title, I'll jump to that. And if I can do that with one click, that'll open that application and that ecosystem, I'll do so. So it's all about the simplicity, the discoverability. You've seen some providers or some, Amazon's done this, Roku has this, Apple TV has this as well. You can add subscription tiers to other services. So you see that you have your Showtimes, your Stars, your Epics that can be bundled into your larger provider and added to your bill. So that ability to add more content, especially niche content under a larger bill, at a lower price. So if you're looking at something that's, $4.99 up to $6.99 or something like that, you add that to your existing service. That's a great way to add that functionality. So you're not selling, necessarily a new destination. You're just giving the option to add content into a channel on a service that you're already paying for, which is simple.
I thank you for that. And I think that it's worth, something we're kind of skirting around with these words of, I wrote them down, removing friction. It has to be easy. A lot of this only comes with experimentation and that flexibility to be able to experiment, working with cloud-based providers, being bold and brave and trying new things and kind of seeing what works, A/B testing. But the most important KPI that I don't think is talked about nearly enough, but the KPI to measure is time to viewing, because that is a measurement of how quickly someone is coming into your app and finding something he or she wants to watch. And this number is outdated. Maybe there's a new one published, but about a year ago, I remember reading that the average time of a Netflix user to find content to watch was 7.4 minutes, where I had all sorts of mixed emotions reading that. One was I was shocked and horrified that, like, that's a really long time to wait. And granted, Netflix has a ton of content and all of these wonderful things, but that is a very long time to wait. And then I also wondered who these active decision makers were, because I know when my family of 4 tries to watch Netflix, it can be like 20 minutes. So anyway, that aside, this KPI of time to viewing, I think, is a really important consideration. And then, Stan Eric, all of the flexibility in UI and categories that you were mentioning are really important. So you need to, again, think about that viewer journey. If you offer live, you need to think of, all right, let's put the live at the top. This is, I need it now. And everyone is always running late. Things take longer to load, perhaps, than they were anticipating. You want to make that easily accessible so they don't miss a minute of their content. It's a very easy way, some hacks, some actionable advice in this area. You know that someone is eager to watch something that they've already started watching. So to make sure that you have a continue watching or resume watching rail, available and easily accessible. I liked the idea of experimenting with different categorization. Seasonality is a great one. It doesn't require all sorts of personalization. That can be a little trickier and maybe a little daunting for some streamers that are less experienced in this area. Things that Netflix does, promoted, the top 10, the viewers, multiple different viewers see the same types of categories, and it works. And then you can kind of experiment with personalization after you kind of nail just forming some relevant categories. And then also, if there are, just kind of latching onto your Halloween example, movies, TV shows for Halloween, but also experiment with different wording, different attention, Halloween movies from female directors, or, whatever might appeal to your audience. I see you nodding along, St. Eric. Did you want to add?
I think you're on such a great point there. That how you organize the content, so it becomes so critical that you have flexible metadata and metadata that you can organize against, and front end partners that can build across that metadata, right? So the ability to dynamically update metadata, especially if you're going after that seasonal push, so that you can differentiate, just using the done by women directors, for Halloween horror movies, and you're able to subgenre very specifically to find that kind of perfect fit. So I think that becomes a critical structure on it, and so important that you have that flexibility to update the metadata, organize by it, and then update the front end quickly to reflect that metadata. It's such a big part of that user journey and giving new content to people.
Top Halloween movies with chainsaws.
That's a great one. I'm gonna look for that later, hopefully.
All right. So I know that we are almost out of time here. I want to make sure that we have time to hear from our panel about their recommendations and some do's and don'ts. So Reeves, let's start with you. Is there anything that you would like to make sure that media brands interested in growing their audience, growing their revenue, growing their businesses should or should not do?
Yeah, I think for a should do is let your content library dictate a lot about your business. So if you have a very live event driven content, for example, if it's one event, pay-per-view is the obvious choice, right? You get one chance, you get as many people into the system as possible. It's live for an hour, 2, 3 hours, and then that's it. That's the end of the event, right? If you stick with sports though, sometimes there's a series, right? There could be 10, 20, 30 plus events, races, games in a given series. The best way to go there is obviously either monthly, annual, season pass, right? If it's TV, film style content and it's totally unique and it cannot be found anywhere else, monthly, annual, very premium price point, as Stein Eric was mentioning earlier. If it's not remarkable content, but it's easily accessible, right? Maybe that off VOD AVOD experience. So it will dictate so much of what your decision-making process is going to look like over the first year, 2, 3, 4. If you're in the middle of running your business now, on what the next few years are going to look like, how you're going to operate your free trials versus teaser content versus the acquisition funnel, how you retain customers, how you support customer care. If you're an SVOD service that's 24/7 evergreen content, you can have a slightly lower, SLA on response times for customer care. But if you're, again, a live event sports service, you need immediacy of responses. If someone misses that one game that they were looking for, that could sour their entire experience on your platform. You could lose out on 2 more years of customer lifetime value. So there's a lot of moving pieces. Your content library and offering will largely dictate which direction that you go. And then it's really about, finding and trusting the right partners. I'll finish on this one. I had a really interesting prospect conversation the other day, and they had built so much. Everyone loves to build, and no one loves to maintain these tech suites and products. They had built so much 5 or 6 years ago, and they said it was because a lot of these, things and offerings and out in the marketplace didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. There's some really cool products and tools out there. We like to think that we're one of them. I definitely know that Vmon and Applicaster are 2 among them as well. So I think letting your content library dictate your decision-making process, and then finding the right tools. Those are probably my best 2 recommendations.
Right. Stan Eric, over to you.
I'll try to be quick because we're running out of time. So I'll give 3 examples from customers that we have and that have been successful. The first is know your customer, know who you're targeting towards. We help bring Reuters from a B2B service to their first B2C. And the service we built with them, and I'm very proud of this, and we continue to work with them, was focused on high-end Wall Street type commuters that were aware of the Reuters brand. And so they focused on a mobile experience with download to go functionality for their streaming. They really targeted towards the markets of New York and London, where people were taking trains, buses, boats, whatever it is to get into the office. And they gave them that commuter experience. So they knew who their audience was and they targeted well across it. Another great example is understand your price point in the market that you're selling into. One of our big customers, iFlix, launched, in at some point up to 40 different countries, but they launched initially in Southeast Asia, which is very pirate heavy. So if you go outside of their office, you could buy DVDs of anything Hollywood had currently, for $1 or something like that. And so they went to market with a premium content offering, but specific for their market. And they played around with a lot of different price points to find the exact area they could float, right? And so they went down in price point as compared with a Netflix to really compete against piracy and the ability to buy DVDs, right? So it was a different market and they were flexible in their price points. And as they went international, they had different price points for different countries, depending on the factors, the economics, the demographics, and how they're going after. And then the last one really is, a customer we're working actively with right now is Foxtel in Australia. And that philosophy is go skinny to start, carve out a specific niche. You don't have to launch everything right away. You don't have to be the catch-all of all content. Start focusing on different user types and apply different price points based on the type of content. So with Foxtel, we launched some sports services initially around, some leagues in Australia, and then one by one, we've launched them now on 3 very premium services, each focused on a different user type. They have KO, which is an ESPN-like service for Australia. It's got about 50,000 hours of sports, and that's a very premium sports offering. Sports is something that sports fans, you need it. You need to watch it. You need to watch all the games. You're going to watch it all the time. You're going to watch it at work and watch it in the evening. It's what you live for. So you can offer that at a $25 price point because it's very in demand. You're not going to get it everywhere because the rights are very exclusive, so you can have a real premium price. And then they launched a entertainment service called Binge at about $14, right? So different type of user, still premium content, willing to pay something for no ads and kind of the first run shows. And now they've launched the first of its kind news aggregator, all on the same back end, right? And so the ability, and that's at $8. People aren't paying as much for news as you are for entertainment and sports. So give them broad content choices, but focus on the user, find the right price point, and then work with partners like Vmon, Applicaster and Kling that can allow you to do these types of skinny bundles and grow. I think that's the message we're getting across here. It's very easy to add platforms through Applicaster. We have a powerful CMS and a back end where you can spin up many platforms, many different streaming protocols, many different ways to view things and organize content. And Kling gives you the ability to have dynamically flexible payment models, and something that all these technologies you can experiment with, change, adapt, and grow through a common interface. So that's the beauty of it, right?
Right, thanks for that. I'll wrap things up with a do and a don't. My do is do scale your business. It's a land grab for eyeballs. Viewers are going to max out on the number of platforms they'll be using and or subscribing to. There's still a finite amount of attention, even if your platform is free. And you might choose to make that decision to add SVOD because it's a little more predictable. But you need to add these platforms to make your brands accessible to everyone who wants to use them. Some examples of brands that are doing this really well. We work with ProSieben, a major broadcaster in Europe, which has different apps in different regions, different sports app, their network app. They're doing a wonderful job of diversifying, and they have a very savvy strategy driving behind this. But what's really wonderful, and the example I would give, is to add, however you choose to create your apps and develop your apps, you need to choose technologies that are scalable. So in ProSieben's example, they have a back-end tech stack that they have made once. They have code built on top of our platform, in addition to out-of-the-box plugins and partners that we make available. And this is just plugged into all of these different apps so they can move quickly and add this scale really quickly. We see children's brands that have multiple apps for music, for numbers, for stories. It's a great way to keep in touch and building these relationships with audiences that you care about. My don't is don't let perfection get in the way of launching your apps. The second your app is launched, you will want to make changes. And I know so many brands are sweating the details, and the second it's launched, if you don't want to make changes, your marketing department will. This is just bound to happen, and you'll also want to be experimenting. We have actually seen, we released some insights earlier this week, the velocity of new releases and updates. We see our customers launching new versions every 2 months, with the most responsive brands launching every 1.75 months. Whether they are, adding additional partners, adding analytics, adding all of these different things. So the goal is to get into market and start collecting user data to make data-driven decisions. And to anticipate this change. Work with cloud-based providers that will also let you make changes on the fly, so you don't miss a single opportunity. So we are exactly out of time now. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Stain, Eric, Reeves, I appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we did not get to answering any of the questions, but we will reach out individually, and our contact information is below if there's anything that we can do for you. So thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye.